Mr. President, earlier this week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee held a hearing on an issue that I consider one of the greatest moral tests of our time in the conduct of U.S. foreign policy. The situation in Burma, where the Burmese military are committing ethnic cleansing and are perpetrating atrocities. We have a humanitarian crisis. We have perpetrators who expect impunity, and a situation under the watch of the international community and the Trump administration that is allowing the perpetration of atrocities. Ethnic cleansing is defined by the United Nations Commission of Experts as rendering an area ethnically homogeneous by using force or intimidation to remove persons of given groups from an area. Mr. President, half of the population of the Rohingyas in Burma have left. 600,000 people out of 1.2 million. And I might add, those who remain, many are dislocated. There's been a systematic burning of their villages. This didn't just start. It's been a campaign that's gone on for a long period of time, since a 1982 law that denies the Rohingya citizenship, even though they've been residents for generations. The Rohingya are denied freedom of movement, they are denied freedom of education, they are denied health care. This has been a systematic effort to destroy an ethnic community. We have seen this happen far too often in too many places around the world. And once again, we see this happening today in Burma. And once again, the expectation is, well, it's far away, we'll just let it go along. The Senate should be outraged about what is happening. We need to see the international community come together and say, no, we will not let this continue, that we will hold those accountable that are responsible for these actions, that we will provide humanitarian need immediately, that we will stop this type of conduct in a civilized society. This just cannot occur. I think what is transpiring in the Rakhine State today is genocide. I know there will be some discussion about whether it's genocide or not based upon technical definitions. Yet when we see in Burma today clearly meets the definition of deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. That's what's happening in Burma, and that's genocide. The Burmese military is clearly trying to destroy the Rohingya population. For decades, the Burmese government has systematically repressed the Rohingya people. This is the fact, and they have deliberately failed to integrate the population into the general population. As the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid, correctly stated, the decades of persistent and systematic human rights violations have almost certainly contributed to the nurturing of violent extremism, with everyone ultimately losing. They complain about extremism, they're creating it. In my opinion, we are witnessing a military-sponsored ethnic cleansing campaign on the Rohingyas, and it will take significant engagement in the international community at the highest levels in partnership with the Burmese civilian government to address and to hold the perpetrators accountable for these horrific acts. 75 years ago, the world and the United States could have claimed ignorance or lack of information as an excuse for inaction in the face of crimes against humanity, genocide, and barbarism. Today, we have no excuse. Unfortunately, the Rohingya crisis is not the only vexing challenge Burma faces. The Burmese military continues to hold significant influence in politics and in the economy. The peace process, which sought to end the long-standing civil war in the country, has stalled. There are significant reports of human rights issues such as human trafficking, free speech infringement, and political repression. The military control Burma today. That's unacceptable, and that's why we impose sanctions because of military control. Sanction relief was given for what? So that people could be ethnically cleansed? I was pleased to hear State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi committed to implementing all of Kofi Annan's Rakhine State recommendations and to ensure that the Rohingya who fled in the face of brutal military repression have a right to return to their homes. However, she must continue to make this a top priority and work with the international community to provide both the safety of the Rohingya left in Burma and those who want to come home. It's going to be difficult, Mr. President, since their villages have been destroyed. Are they going to live in camps? Will they have the protection? Will they be safe? If the past is any indication, we have real challenges ahead of us. Although I would not count myself among those who have been disappointed that the civilian, although I would count myself, let me correct that, although I would count myself among those who have been disappointed with the civilian authorities, that they should have been more vocal, I am keenly aware of the real limits of its power and the ability to govern under the current constitution and the military control of a large portion of Burma's economy. We have a challenge on our hands in Burma, and we need to be engaged, but the civilian leadership must take responsibility and must speak out. Too often, the international community has done too little, waited too long, or been caught unprepared by events that should not have surprised us. We continue to forget the lessons of the past and fail to live up to the post-Holocaust pledge of never again, ignoring the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity that continue to rage around the world sends a message to the global community that atrocity crimes are tolerable. We must respond robustly to the crisis unfolding in Burma because it's the right thing to do and because it's in our national interest to do so. The United Nations is calling the military campaign a textbook example of ethnic cleansing against Rohingya Muslims. From credible human rights organizations and newspapers, there are consistent accounts of widespread extrajudicial killings, arson, rape, and other atrocities. At least 288 villages have been decimated, according to Human Rights Watch, which has used satellite imagery as evidence of the devastation caused by these so-called clearance operations. These current attacks on the Rohingya follow decades of state-led persecution and dehumanization. Government efforts to deny Rohingya citizenship rights, restrict their freedom of movement and the practice of their faith, and deny their basic human rights have all been identified as precursors to a genocide. The Office of the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights found that the attacks were executed in a well-organized, coordinated, and systematic manner by the Myanmar security forces, often supported by the armed Rakhine Buddhists. They have described the attacks as a cynical ploy to forcibly transfer large numbers of people without possibility of return. Were also appalling acts of sexual violence, which clearly amount to crimes against humanity, and or acts of genocide that must not be forgotten. Women and girls, some as young as 5, raped by men in uniform in front of their families. UN and other health workers said that after this most recent August 2017 military crackdown, they treated dozens of Rohingya women and girls who had escaped to Bangladesh for injuries consistent with violent sexual attacks. One woman told Human Rights Watch that she and 4 other women were taken to a hut, slashed with knives, and sexually assaulted. The soldiers then set the hut on fire. She was the only one to escape alive. Another woman who was raped still has injuries from the machete attack and beatings that accompanied the rape, and said that she could barely manage to escape from a burning house. I also want to draw attention to the needs of the survivors, their families, and communities. There is an acute lack of health care available to the survivors, including reproductive health, psychosocial, and other critical services. Mr. President, 75 years ago, the world, the United States, could have said that they did not know what is happening. Today we do. Today we have no excuse. Instead, the international community must hold the perpetrators accountable. In addition, yet to date, no real progress has been made in either holding perpetrators of serious violations accountable or in addressing the root causes underlying the situation in Burma. Therefore, there is an urgent need to act. The strong statement by Ambassador Haley and last month by Vice President must be followed up with action. The administration should lead efforts for action in the Security Council. The Security Council should insist that persons responsible for grave abuses be held accountable for their crimes. It also should press the Burmese Authority to cooperate with the UN fact-finding mission established by the United Nations Human Rights Council and grant unfettered access to its staff to Burma, including the Rakhine State. We need to know what's happening on the ground. We need to know that in order to protect people and to get the evidence necessary to hold the perpetrators accountable. The Council should send a clear message that it stands ready to take additional steps to ensure justice, including through the International Criminal Court, and urge member states to pursue other mechanisms that might provide justice for recent abuses. I should also add that Bangladesh deserves credit for keeping its borders open to the influx of refugees. 600,000 have fled to Bangladesh, and they kept their borders open. Bangladesh has been one of the few bright spots in the current crisis and should continue to honor its promise to build shelters for new arrivals, accelerate humanitarian assistance, and provide the needed medical service for the traumatized group. I also believe that the United States needs to reevaluate our policy and approach to Burma. We need to have a policy in regards to Burma that we understand, that addresses these human rights violations, that reevaluates our approach for our relationship with the Burmese military, and that relooks at how to best use sanctions as a way to seek additional leverage with the Burmese military and government. I'm working with a number of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on legislation to seek to clarify U.S. policy and to address some of these issues. As the President prepares for his upcoming trip to the ASEAN summit in the region, Congress will be watching closely to see if he makes Burma and human rights a top priority during this trip, and what he and his administration chooses to undertake in the coming days to address the tragedy unfolding in the Rakhine State. With that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.